makes me crazy because it's like, on one hand, you're telling women you are strong, you are powerful. Oh, wait a minute. Except unless you have children. If you choose to have children, which is how literally you were created, your body was created for that. But if you do that, no, then you're weak.
Welcome to the podcast. We're so glad you joined us today. And we have heard about this title, this topic, this author for a while now.
There were more than one person from different avenues who said, "Oh, have you talked to Catherine Pakaluk? And you should
have you heard about Hannah's Children?" And blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, so we were really excited to have her on. You guys are really going to love this interview. She is a woman, first of all, who has a really cool story herself, but she has collected stories from mothers of large families, from all different walks of life and different religions. They're not just Catholic, some Jewish, some Muslim, Mormon. And I think that her background as a researcher kind of comes through. So I thought it was fascinating stories, but also fascinating the conclusions that she draws
insights.
From it. Yeah. You guys are going to love this interview.
All right. So before we get to that interview, we want to make sure, it has probably been a while, but we are closing up very shortly here our getaway to the Bahamas.
Yes.
It is next January. We are going with Pat and Nancy Madrid, Kana and Annie Hickman, Father Sean Monahan. We're going to an all-inclusive, beautiful, the Royal Bohemian probably as well. But it's going to be, it is in the Bahamas in January. When you want to get away in the dead of winter, we're there for you. We want to all come together to renew your marriage and really breathe new life into your home.
Every single one of these getaways are blessed and amazing, and people walk away. I think we have like 4.9 stars, from people yes, in regards to the getaway. And I think we may get a solid 5.0 because especially this, the place where we're having the getaway is going to be absolutely amazing. Everything is included, guys. All you do, you get there. All tips, all transportation, activities.
You have to get there to the airport.
Alcoholic drinks, food.
Everything else.
Like
scuba diving.
Yes. You just
all
pay.
Included.
Just pay for what is listed on the website and buy your flight. You're done. Yeah. Okay. There's no hidden costs here unless you want to buy trinkets for your kids or your grandkids. So anyway, it is a great deal and we are so excited to be with you. So go ahead and sign up, CatholicCouplesGetaway.com.
That's right. All right. Well, maybe we should just jump right into the interview because it's a lot of fun. So Catherine, again, is is she an economist and a researcher, right? Mm-hmm. And you'll see the fascinating conversation we had with Catherine. Enjoy.
Welcome, Catherine. We are so happy to have you here with us. And I am really, really excited about this kind of unusual, but a very natural topic, I guess. But anyway, thanks for joining us today.
You're welcome.
Yeah, really excited with your book, but also just the stories that you're going to tell us. Mm-hmm. But before we jump into the book, I just love to get to know you a little bit more, just kind of your background personally before we...
Well, before you give us your background, I just want to say, just to tell our lilisteners, we had probably 4 or 5 people reach out to us and say, you must have Catherine Pakaluk on your show. Just all different
from
walks of life.
From bishops to young couples
seriously, so many people said it. So we're really excited to have you here. But again, your background?
Yes. So I'm a wife and a mom. I have 8 children with my husband, Michael, and we have a messy blended family. So Michael was a widower when we got married, and they had 6 children. So together we've raised the 6 plus the 8. So yeah, a lot of messy stuff and stories in there, but a lot of just beautiful, resurrection stories. So really, a blessing. And so we've been married 26 years next week, which Beautiful. We're really, really excited about. I hardly feel old enough to have been married 26 years, but we will not do the math. We will just let that be. And my husband's an academic philosopher. When we met, I was in graduate school pursuing my PhD in economics and really felt called at that time to understand more about kind of how God made the world. And in particular, things I was interested in 26 years ago had to do with whether, whether we had to really export birth control and sterilization to assist countries in becoming wealthy and stable. And that was, in the late 90s still, people were worried about overpopulation. And I, as a, daughter of God and an earnest young pro-life student, I thought, is it really necessary that we have to sort of like help people suppress their fertility to be economically prosperous? And I didn't know the answer. So I went into graduate school to try to learn the answer, to find out. And so I was a graduate student at Harvard. And I tell that because that this academic kind of orientation to learning and study is a big part of our marriage and who we are as a couple and kind of how we've conducted our time together at home. So although I didn't do it full time for most of our marriage, we have continued that conversation. And so, as my children got older and my youngest was born, started to think about what I could do to kind of return to those things that had motivated me 25 years ago. And so that's who I am. So now today I teach economics at Catholic University, which is the Bishop's University. And it's a great privilege to be there. And we teach together. So it's just a real, just a real gift to be able to teach and to think together.
So it's interesting because what I'm hearing is that you kind of started with that macro issue of do more people equal poverty or do more people equal wealth? But the book is really kind of brings it down to the micro, to the actual women and husbands who are doing the work of raising families. So that's so interesting that you were motivated by that big macro issue, which when you hear it, it's just in my spirit, kind of like what you were just saying, like as a daughter of God, you're like, in your spirit, you're like, I don't really feel like I need to know to believe that this sounds wrong. Like, I don't need to know the reasons, but other people probably need to know the reasons. So I'm going to be motivated,
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I didn't doubt, it must be the case that,
Totally.
But I mean, this tension that you put it so beautifully, this tension between maybe like an intuitive sense that like, well, a family can only have so many people, a city can only have so many people, or a country. That seems to be really intuitive for a lot of people. There's a kind of simple, like, well, there's, X amount of resources and X amount of people. And if you add another person, like there's less for everyone, right? That seems like airtight. And that goes back, in economics for a couple of hundred years to people like Thomas Malthus. But we know like in the more recent past, Paul Ehrlich, or these kind of, we could say population scary people. And then, then you have this sort of eyes of faith. On the other hand, you think, well, it doesn't seem right that God set us up with these two orientations that are at war with each other. One is to be fruitful and multiply, which is so beautiful, and even a command. And on the other hand, to sort of prosper and to bring forth good things. Like these things can't be at odds, so that somehow as we multiply, we have to sort of do, dastardly things to survive. So, but the whole question is why and how. And of course, as you put it, the answer is always going to come down to the micro level, right? Because that's where God interacts with humanity. Actually, he's not like the great like clockmaker in the sky. He's like, speaking to the heart, right? So after lots of years of thinking about this, I thought that's where we have to look, is what's going on in the heart.
Yeah, that's so beautiful. Before you women want to go to the heart, which I think is great, and that's
great.
But I worked in politics for a number of years, and I actually remember a very zealous, fairly newly minted, I think maybe Harvard or something like that, and asked me out to lunch and said, "Hey, I'm really concerned that you have so many children."
And we had 4 at the time.
What would you say now? I don't know. And she was very sincere, very concerned about the world, right? And she's like, I'm in politics because I care about the world, and it feels like you're being irresponsible and this and that. And then don't you know all the things, all the consumption that's going to take place? And but we do have a lot of people, for many reasons, choosing not to have children. Yeah. But what is the lens? Because I think we all intuitively know that that we're not at the replacement rates, you know, that we're all these things. What's some of the background of the world that we live in from a standpoint of the dearth, if you will, of the children?
Yeah. So, well, where we are today in the United States, we use these numbers, total fertility rates. They're kind of just a really nice thumbnail sketch. And where we are today in the United States is that for the average for the country is that the typical couple will have 1.6 children. So so that's two people will have 1.6 people. And so we say that that's below replacement. They won't even replace themselves. So that's a nice, handy heuristic that, it sums up a lot of things.
Yes.
Countries, most of the European nations are below 1.5. So 1.5 children. How low can that go? Demographers have wondered for a long time, but we can look to countries like South Korea. So in South Korea, the average for the whole country would be really somewhere around 0.7, 0.68. And in the city of Seoul, like it's about 0.5. So, so that's two people having half of a child on average, right? So, so that's very, very low. The United States is, 1.6, which is very, very low. So if you stay at a number below 2 for a little while, a couple of decades, what you will eventually see is that the overall population will shrink, right? Because each two people are having fewer than themselves. And you can mask over that. You can kind of gloss over it, not notice it for a while if you import a lot of people. So immigration. And so I mention that because, of course, today, anybody following the news, right, knows that this is a really contentious issue for us today, whether and how much immigration we should have and how we should conduct that. And setting aside the politics of it, in the 1990s, the 1980s, 1990s, in the United States, we kind of sat a little bit up on our high horse. We said, well, we don't have this population problem because our birth rates look a little bit more healthy than Western Europe or Japan. And actually, that was because of immigration coming in. And so now as immigration is receding, we, after 9/11, we really slowed down a lot of the immigration, where it's revealed that actually the underlying propensity to have children in this country is not very high. Right. So that's where we are. We are at a place where we are not yet, our overall population is not yet shrinking. Many countries are, many countries in Europe, China is shrinking, Japan is shrinking, obviously. But our working age population is already shrinking because that will shrink first, right? So we have more people retiring every year than entering the workforce. And that's why actually there are many, many jobs that are going unfilled these days. So that's where we are. That's the macro level.
Okay.
It's bad enough that people are, that colleague of yours that sat you down today would look like a different conversation. Today would be like, what are you doing? What do you see that everyone else doesn't see?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And that kind of gets to about the book, right?
Yeah.
And why you wanted to tell the stories of these women. Like instead of writing a book, an economic book, like a science book.
Yeah.
Why did you choose to go this route? Because there's other books about like the demographic winter and all of that.
Right.
And I love it that you, as a mother of a large family, decided to go this route. I've actually had thoughts in my mind of like, I have daydreams of projects that I want to do, and I've often thought of like doing a show or something, they have like Real Wives of, Silicon Valley or whatever.
Yeah.
And I thought about doing like Real Wives of Steubenville, and like showing people, look, here's, because I have so many friends who have 6+ kids, and these are beautiful women, intelligent women, smart women, driven women. And I'm like, I would love for people to just see, guys, it's not so bad, but that's what you did. So
that's
so
right.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah, I hope that some of the listeners of your show, when they read this, I hope they see parts of themselves inside of this book, or some of those Real Wives of Steubenville that you mentioned. My sister, one of my sisters, is giving birth today or tomorrow. God willing, where she's about to be induced, and she's in Pittsburgh, and they can't fit her in at the hospital. She said, too many people must have read your book because there's a baby boom in Pittsburgh.
It's too close to Steubenville. See, all the Steubenville people are going to Pittsburgh.
Exactly. Very close. So we're asking for prayers for her. But so that's a great question. Just a couple of reasons why I chose this approach and to deal with this. So actually, in a sense, like this intuition that you had, which is sort of like, what do you do with the fact that the entire world is going in this one direction where there's not enough babies being born? But in your own personal life and experience, I came from a large family, a large Catholic family. We were always say, are you Catholic or Mormon growing up? So I came from a larger family. We've gone on to welcome lots of kids. And I know, large families know each other. They find each other. So it's like, that there's this group of people out there that is just going in the other direction. And so I, as an economist and looking at the literature on this, I thought, is there something I could add to this conversation about falling birth rates? And that took me a while to let that germinate. I thought, well, there is something to add, but it's going to be something that really does have to be, we would say, qualitative. It really does have to get at the micro level. And why? Basically, because we already know that religious people all over the world tend to have more children than kind of secular society. That's known at the macro level. It's a strong correlation, we would say. Okay. What we need to understand, and we desperately need to understand, and that message has to get through. And I'll say that in a minute. We need to understand why. Why do religious people have more children? Because when I put it that way, immediately, probably you and all of your listeners will be like, "Oh, I know what people are going to say." When you say religious people have more kids, they'll say, "Well, too bad," because we don't want to go back to that bad old world where all these nice women got forced into having babies by like the Pope or the rabbi or their bad husbands, right? That would be one version of the story. Or another version of the story would be, we don't want to go back to that world where women don't think they have anything meaningful they can do besides breeding. And so, in those narratives, which are, really obviously maybe based on like a partial truth from some partial story, we know that not every story about religious childbearing is a good one. There might be a sliver of truth, but in that there's baked in all of this sort of myth and stereotype about religious women. So there were many things you have to sort of undo when you go into that project. Now I'll say, from the perspective of an economist, I was seeing about 10 years ago a shift in countries and policymakers who were very alarmed at their low birth rates. You take a country like Hungary, they were sitting around 1.2 about 10 years ago. They had a very strong nationalist president who became president, and it was the second time. And he said, all right, we're going to fix this problem. And, started putting a lot of money and cash incentives on people having children. And I was seeing this interest in this all around the world. And I thought, if we don't, number one, explain why it is that these sorts of cash incentives won't do the job, we will see more and more of this. And it will probably be distorting at best, and probably really oppressive to the human spirit at worst. And we can get into that. Yeah. A lot of people say, well, you're pro-family and you think God wants kids, so why don't you think the government should try to get people to have kids? Well, okay, wait. So that was the first point. And the second point was, how do you explain, yes, this is something that is born of faith, right? There's something deep inside. It doesn't have to be, but it is mostly. And not, and then at the same time, convey to a non-believer that decision-making, which is informed by faith, is not irrational.
Right.
And that's the whole problem. And you can't do that with a survey or a set of numbers. And so that's like ultimately my answer to you is like, why did I take the story approach? Because you need to somehow convey these are people motivated by faith, but it's not an irrational choice of choosing. Yeah. And this is the only vehicle.
I have such almost like a visceral reaction, when you're talking about people basically assume that women who have a lot of children are oppressed. And that just makes me crazy.
Because I'm a little bit on the I don't know.
She's the oppressor in the relationship.
But it makes me crazy because it's like, on one hand, you're telling women, you are strong, you are powerful. Oh, wait a minute. Except unless you have children. If you choose to have children, which is how literally you were created, your body was created for that. But if you do that, no, then you're weak and you're strong and you can't stand up for yourself. It's like, how dare you imply that I can't stand up for myself? You know what I mean? And that is it possible that women I feel like it's the lie of feminism that has been steeped into our culture over the last real, I mean, we're coming on probably like 100 years almost,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
of active feminism in academia, in politics and law. And
Right.
it's just, it's such a lie, and it is illogical. I think that's also because it's like, it's inherently illogical to tell me that I'm powerful as a woman unless I do the thing that differentiates me from a man, which is being able to bear life.
Exactly. No, you couldn't be more right. Yeah. Yeah.
All right. So you've set the stage. This is the backdrop. These are the motivations that you had in approaching this kind of a research project, right?
Yeah.
Really trying to get a qualitative understanding of why these women are really standing up, defying the cultural norms, if you will, because that's when you see that kind of statistic.
Yeah.
I always picture, when we, it's the outlier, right? Why are these people doing things that
That's right.
Nobody else is doing?
Yeah.
And it is too shallow to say, oh, it's merely because they're oppressed or merely because they're religious in some false sense. Yes, clearly there's a correlation. Clearly there's a motivation. Clearly there's a perspective.
I think it's like religious obedience. I think that's what some people say. Oh, it's only because of being religiously obedient, not religion being forming themselves.
And this probably won't come into play, but and I think from what I understand, you've looked at stories throughout different religions, right? So I am more than just a little curious, but I also have found in our own experience personally, but also from couples we've met, that religion and family go together, meaning that which preceded the other. It kind of goes back and forth in some ways, because I feel like I am a more religious and more reliant upon God now that I have children. So it's like I was religious before, but it actually drew me deeper into it. And so I wonder how many their religiosity, if that's the right word, actually increased and was impacted by also having children, that they play off of each other. So I don't know.
You can comment on that.
Yeah, for sure. Those two things work together. So I like to say that in the book, I try to present in the first 5 or 6 chapters, like I kind of hit the reader with kind of the most normal ways that people explain why they became open to children. And it's kind of 2 categories, and they talk to each other, those 2 things. And one is some kind of religious conversion. So I lead off with 2 examples, very different Christian faiths, and religious conversion where they didn't think about family, they didn't think about wanting to be open to life. So some kind of religious conversion. The other normal way is to have been exposed from a young age to the joy of family life. Now, of course, that often means their parents had some kind of religious experience or commitment. And so oftentimes those stories, I tell the story of a Catholic woman from a large family and a Mormon woman from a large family who had just learned from a young age, like, this is where the joy is.
Yeah.
And I would say that was a big piece of my openness to the blessing of children. But of course, that's not really disentangleable from that life of faith that was lived in my family. So they're not really separable, but it's like you can't talk about the religious piece without also talking about how for many people, the experience of the joy of children. However, I led off with these conversion stories because not everybody in my sample, not even the majority, had grown up exposed to the joy of children. So that's an ordinary way. And I think it's what's motivated my children who have gotten married at a youngish age. They just know this is the way we're meant to live. It's the best way to live. You find that spouse that God is going to send you. But it's very helpful to tell the readers right up front. Some people have a knocked off the horse experience where they go, I've been living a life which is meaningless. And I'm searching for meaning. And I've seen in this religious community, it's usually meeting a living religious community. The very first story you meet in the book is someone who, trying to find the meaning of life, moves to Israel. And she's like a normal American kid. And she's got this very loose, not particularly religious Jewish background, moves to Israel, meets this charismatic community and this rabbi with a bunch of kids. There's a whole bunch of other, young adults following this rabbi. She meets the man who becomes her husband there. And she says, I was looking for the meaning of life and I saw having children is kind of the meaning of life, right? And it's connected to her faith deeply, right? She says, this connects me in a chain going back to Moses and Adam. And you're like, well, yeah, wow, like that's an amazing story. And even telling it now, like the hair on my arm stands up. I'm sitting in her living room, sort of falling off the chair. And she's somebody who didn't grow up with the joy of children and would tell you, and did tell me, we're not good at this. My husband and I are not well organized. 7 seems to be our limit. We don't think we can have more. And then she has this beautiful explanation of what it looks like to understand deeply to her core that God wants to bless us with children, but that we can actually be stretched to our limits, and that sometimes you're not ready, but you can get on your knees and say, God, make me ready if you want to bless us again. And she says something like, well, you don't want, but you want to want.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that is just such, so, I mean, to your question, Mike, I mean, it's so deeply connected, this faith, and how that makes us more religious, right? That more dependent on God, because we've like reached our limit, but we know God wants us and he will provide for our lack. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, that was just a profound grace for me to hear those stories from women of different faith backgrounds, but, all Judeo-Christian.
So that idea of being ready, like you hear this a lot, like see someone saying, well, I'm not ready to start a family, or I'm not ready to have another child. And I guess when I am in conversations with women who say things like that, I just kind of say to them, the reality is that you're kind of never ready. Like nothing can really prepare you for the earth-shattering experience of having a child. It's the biggest change of your life. And I think that that's also true for having more children, because I don't know. I have a good friend of mine who has 6 children, and she says, people ask us, how many kids do we plan to have? And she's like, 0, none.
Yeah,
they just got
exactly.
He was like, we were never ready. Every pregnancy, we were surprised. Like, I can't believe it. Like, we're having another baby.
And they do know how it happens.
Yeah,
but,
right. I know. You hear that all the time.
Yeah.
Yes, but it's interesting. It seems like that's a lot of women's experience, is that nobody really feels, quote, ready. Because what is that anyway?
Yeah. No, that's right. That was a big challenge for writing this book, was to try to convey. And it's not easy to try to convey what that looks like. The sense that the women I talked to all felt that God wanted their cooperation and their yes, which is not the same as saying, whatever, whenever, anytime, right?
Yes.
A couple of women I met did live that way, and they were very explicit about it, but most women I met did not. And that's really important for communicating the sense that this is rational behavior, that this is the sort of thing where husbands and wives together in prayer. And some couples are more we'll say psychologically ready to like push their limits, or to sort of step out in faith, like, okay, God will provide. But sometimes, legitimately, there's times where people need a little bit of space, physical health, whatever, and actually trying to portray the variety of ways that couples get to their next yes, right? That was hard. It was not easy to do, because if you do it too lightly, it does look like, it can look, not oppressive, but like not rational. Does God want us to be healthy? Of course he does. Does God? So what does that look like? To your point about planning, how many did you plan to have? That's a great point. That gets exploded in the book, which is that for people who view children as a blessing and not as an acquired like collection on your mantelpiece, right? It's like, well, I want 5 little mantelpiece children, that if you take this posture of openness to receive a blessing, which is very different from acquisitiveness, that they, how many did you plan on is not a question that means much. Right?
Yeah.
And so there are a couple stories of people who planned on 2 or planned on 3, and then were like led little by little into a more open posture. But yeah, I heard things like planned, yes, but not planned by us, right? That's a beautiful expression, right? So the sense that like we're planning as husbands and wives, there is a sense of that word, of course, is laden with all kinds of terrible things in our culture today. I think you said earlier, responsibility, right? That God wants us to exercise prudence.
Yeah.
But that it's not something we're doing without him. So, like with all things with God, he is going to push us to that venture of faith, like as Newman calls it, the venture or the adventure, the risk. And so, yeah, that's a beautiful dance, I guess. And the only way to do that is just tell a lot of stories.
Well, I always would tell like young women, I feel like in the year after you have a baby, I'm like, you need to just recover, and I've had so many midwives say that. I'm like, you don't need to discern if you should have another child. Like, no, you need to be, the way I always thought of it is I would use the word stewardship, like you need to be a good steward of your body. Nutritionally, you need to recover because you have to take care of the children that you have,
right.
But then beyond that, sometimes people just get overwhelmed with the number of children they have and they think, I don't know. And I think too, our society sets up this picture, which is why we call ourselves the Messy Family Project, because they set up this picture of like, if you're going to have a family, it needs to look like this.
Right.
And I'm like, no, it doesn't.
It doesn't.
Like, no, and that's not necessarily even happiness for you or for the children.
Right.
And so did you find that in your stories? Did you find a kind of multitude and a diversity of different ways that people approached having children, let alone their family in this conversation? Did you see that?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, if you're looking for those details in the book, you'll see them. I didn't discuss them directly as much as as much as some readers might have wanted me to, because I really was trying to get at this decision thing. But you'll see it. Like there's some houses I walk into and I tell you, like, as I walked into her house, like, it was sort of picture perfect, looked like a magazine. Other homes, not so much. Right? So, there's all these varieties. Or you hear, like Hannah, who I already mentioned, Hannah says, how like they're really just not organized and, they're, and it's clear when you're in her house, like, it's not super tidy. So yeah, we see that whole collection. Or the moms who said, for me, the way our family is at peace is that we're not on a school schedule. So homeschooling is really the way we make this work because there's no schedule but mine. Versus the families that are like, I would just go crazy if I didn't have the sort of if we didn't have to have that schedule. So just, a million ways to get the job done.
So different. There isn't one. So this is the thing is that like, I always think of like for like priests or religious, if you have this personality, you become a priest or religious. And I thought that's not true. And I think it's true for moms too. It's like, it's not like, if you have this personality, you have a big family.
Yeah. And let's mention another kind of diversity, because it's easy to say, okay, there's messy and there's less messy. And we're talking about homes. Certainly wealth. I saw a variety of things, husbands who really were super successful. And then, families that were really living kind of paycheck to paycheck. There was that kind of diversity. But I also want to mention, I think, things that a lot of people who are looking at other families might, really, they weren't all necessarily like super chipper and happy, like in a superficial way. Some of them confessed and told me in different ways about how they'd struggled with either postpartum depression, prepartum depression, or just overall general depression in their lives. It's just worth mentioning, right? Because these things don't have to be obstacles. It doesn't mean you can't have the joy of children or live the joy of children. But there's this kind of more interesting story there of what that can look like. I couldn't spend a lot of time on those stories, but they're in there and I may get the chance to tell some of those. And it's just worth mentioning because I do think a lot of times people say, well, I'd like to do that thing, but like I wasn't made that way. And so that variety is really beautiful. Some people had great pregnancies, just felt like, well, why would I not have another, this one of the moms who was having her 10th when I visited her. And since then I've seen her and she's had her 12th. And then the moms who like every pregnancy, they were deathly ill and really, really sick. So all of those types of differences I think are worth stressing.
Right.
Because a lot of people think, it's just for you who are very cheerful or just for you who seem to be like, you've got everything together.
Organized or whatever.
Yeah. Or your personality is just suited for that. Or your economic situation or whatever.
Because see, what I always think too is that a lot of those issues, depression, postpartum, or even the economic struggles, financial struggles people have, families of any size experience those stressors. And it doesn't necessarily mean, but those families who have many children, have those struggles, but they also have the great blessing
Yeah.
of the children in their home, and they're a great comfort, to them.
That's right. Well, Hannah also, there's so many great stories, but she said something similar. And these are all pseudonyms, but Hannah in the book, she said something like, look, we have to remember that given who we are, and how we came to be the adults that we are, we have our background and our baggage and our gifts and our strengths and our weaknesses. Like there's a sort of an allotted amount of like disorder in your life that you're going to deal with, right? Just because of your weaknesses. And you're always trying to work that out with God. And she said, but what we do as a culture is we just turn and we blame it on the kids. Right. And she said, like, marriages do this. We say, oh, we're fighting or this or that. Like we blame it on the kids. And that really struck me. One of the other moms also mentioned that we scapegoat children. We turn children into the reason for the problems that are ours. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
And I was really moved by that. I thought, well, she's 100% right. And
really
so she said, yes. And then it's like, well, it's almost like we turn children into an excuse not to live our full potential.
Yes.
When actually, like, God is actually looking to help us achieve our full potential through our weaknesses. And yeah. And of course, this is so Pauline and so scriptural. And yet, like, man, I mean, it does take a lifetime to sort of like really accept, like, God actually does want to use my weakness.
But the kids are great at bringing that out, right?
They do, exactly.
Kids draw it out, but it's in a real way, it's like they're drawing out the poison that's in us that we need to be dealt with. That needs the sanitary healing lights from the sun.
Yeah. I always think about when I'd be talking with somebody like in the grocery store or whatever, and people would say, oh, I just couldn't have another, whatever. And then like their child is literally standing right there. I always think like, what is that child thinking? Like, what is wrong with me that my parents don't want to have any more kids? And I don't think, and parents just kind of say that reflexively a lot. Like, oh, this is all I could handle or blah, 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 whatever the things that people say right in front of their children,
Yeah.
And I don't think that they recognize, and I think that word scapegoating, that's a really powerful word. And I think that that's really true,
Right.
Mm-hmm. And let me ask you this, as you look at the couples, the families, the women that you spoke with, how many, or did they have, I guess, maybe strategies in their mind, or whether by retrospect, looking back, or in the midst of it, that helped them deal with the fact that they were different than the culture around them, or that they had the courage to be open? Like, were there things that they either developed or had, either skills or habits or mindset, if you will? Did you find any of that across the? Yeah,
certainly. I think that you mentioned the word mindset. I think mindset is really important, although it's kind of a secular, like, it's a secular version of a thing that we know, like to put on faith, like put it on like your armor. But that mindset, like kind of the essence of that, I'm reminded of something Kim said in one of the first chapters. Kim and Alex had 12 children. They lived in the Rocky Mountains, and it's a great story for anybody that is just starting out the book. Just skip to Kim's chapter because it's just a great story. But she said at some point, I don't worry about what people say because my joy doesn't come from that. And I thought, well, that's a really beautiful like expression of this kind of, we could call it a mindset, but it really is like that armor of faith. But I really would be remiss if I didn't mention where does that come from in most people? How do you live with that that armor? And really, this is being in close contact, embedded in, enmeshed in what I've come to call living religious communities.
Okay.
When I say living, I mean a couple of things. So first of all, why do I not say churches? Well, we have our Jewish brothers and sisters who wouldn't call it a church. But that doesn't mean that their connection or embeddedness in a religious community isn't part of what's going on. So I've broadened that term to include our Jewish brothers and sisters. And when I say living religious communities, that's my way of distinguishing the churches and religious communities where like there are lots of families and they're growing and people are getting married young and having children versus, some of them are, old, some of the more typical old-fashioned churches like the mainline Protestant churches and certainly many Catholic churches where they're kind of closing up and dying off. Yeah. I didn't want to use language that I think is not not helpful to anybody's faith community. But I would say, like, as Catholics, like Orthodox Catholics, it's not a real word. It's not a term. So, I was trying to struggle with, like, so the Mormons have the same thing. The Mormons are like, well, we've got some Mormons that are having a lot of kids and getting married. And then there's a whole bunch of other ones that have, like, settled into this normal mainstream lifestyle. And you found the same thing with the Jews. So in other words, inside of each of these religious traditions that is on paper committed to the goodness of marriage and children, you find communities that are living this out. And so I'm calling them living because they're growing. So you can point to those churches. Oh, they're busting at the seams, like people trying to get, and that. So when you say, Mike, like, I mean, there's a lot of other little things, but probably the number one thing is that people who are making it through, doing a thing, living a thing that's very different. How do they manage that for the long run? Not alone, just not alone.
That's beautiful.
Very
That's beautiful.
good. That's really
it is not good for man to be alone. It's not good for our family to be alone. Right.
And Jesus sent the apostles out together in twos. I mean, we definitely don't want to get the idea that, like, we just read the right Bible passage and then we can just sit at home and, like, get the job done. We're so needy. We so need our neighbors. And we need to be encouraged in the faith.
Yeah.
So
that's so
I
important.
actually, even my parents, when we were, when they were having, multiple children and it was like their family was growing and growing, they found a living religious community outside of their parish. Like, they traveled. We traveled every Sunday. Like, we would go to mass on Sunday. Then we traveled 45 minutes to meet with another group of people who supported the values that my parents wanted to give to us. So when people say, well, there's nobody at my church, I'm like, find it.
Find another church.
I know that my parents, and I remember as a child, like at one point, like meeting with some families in our local area, but I guess, I don't know the story, but I guess for whatever reason, that really wasn't feeding my parents. And then they found this community that we joined, and that those people are still their closest friends. So I'm so glad that you said that about community, because we even, I've said so many times, I don't know if I couldn't do what I do outside of my community. Like, I need, on a practical level, not just their example, but like a friend I can call and be like, I have someone throwing up and I need help, like.
No, that's huge. I mean,
people think that they have to do it alone, and they don't.
Yeah. So go back to this macro question, like the birth rates are falling, and we've got these policymakers who are like, let's just get money to people. And there's a lot of reasons why getting money to people doesn't solve, but the intuition is that somehow, like, it's hard to have kids. And if we could sort of get you some resources, the thing is that the resources that people need are human. They're spiritual. When I say human, I mean they're conveyed through a human being, a spiritual being who's receiving grace from God to be your encouragement, and vice versa. And so you can't buy that, and you can't, like, make it happen as a policymaker. So the intuition is sort of like, in a weird way, right? Like, we want to make this better for people, but the only kind of better that seems to exist is right on a regular basis is coming from these church communities. And so actually, like, then the policymakers say, well, we can't do anything about this. It's just religion. You're like, well, how are you treating your churches?
Right.
Right. So it's like, that's a paradigm shift for the policymakers. That's what I'm sort of engaged in trying to, like, you could actually get, you could get down there in the policy room and you could think, like, what could we do to protect the space in which people receive those resources to go ahead and live this way? What could we do? Or are there ways in which we're challenging or oppressing our church communities that we didn't even notice, for instance? And so there's a bunch of that. So yeah, this is so vital. These spiritual resources that come through other actual human beings that that you can call when your kid is throwing up. So yeah, and that's what we have to, like, laser focus on that. That's where this comes from.
And just thinking about it, just again, having I'm a recovering politician, right? So, but just in that form of life, thinking about that, there is nobody who could pay us enough,
right,
to do what we do for our kids.
Right.
And there's nobody that I could pay
right.
to what I know our kids need. Like, I am thankful for Catholic schools. I'm thankful for even public school. That is wonderful, but there is no way that they provide what we know. And there's there's no amount of money that you want to say, okay, the heartache, the pain, the suffering, the longing, the money. Yes, you want to make, there's a certain level where it's like,
there's a baseline.
There's a baseline of family living, which again, economics plays a big part of having that. Mm-hmm. But more doesn't actually make it easier.
That's right.
But I'm glad you're engaging in that again, just from a bigger standpoint, because I also think there's the challenges of the environment from without, meaning the policy and the tax and the how we're supporting churches, but then from within the church, say, okay, we actually can do something about this. As a church, to be able to say the birth, and that's why I'm so glad there were leaders in the church who are talking about your book. And because when you look at our church, we have the right teachings and we have the right moral foundation. We even have the right biblical, inspirational, standing. Right. But what we need is a more vibrant, family-friendly church where it's saying, not only are your kids allowed at church for making noises, that's baseline, right? What we need is a place where moms and dads can feel like, okay, I can put my burdens down for a second. Like our parish over the summer had a couple of date nights where childcare was provided, right? And a beautiful meal and a time for mom and dad just to focus on each other. And it's like, we need that for families in all the churches to say, your family is not only welcome here, we actually want to encourage and support you in whatever way. And I remember,
well, I think it's forming that network of relationships.
That's it is. You're right.
That's one of the things I've come to think of. That's what churches should be, a place where families can network, not just with other families, but also recognizing that every family needs grandparents. Like, even if they're not their physical grandparents, they need like older people, or they need aunts and uncles. You know, like, you need those single people who maybe aren't married yet or who don't have children yet. We need those people. Like, we have a nephew who lives in town who is not yet married, and oh my gosh, but he comes in clutch for us all the time, you know? And it's a great blessing, but we need to be able to go to a parish and be like, okay, these are people that share my values, and there's somebody that I can call on who is not at the same place that I'm at. Right. Because that's another thing you hear. A lot of young moms will say to me, well, I would reach out to my friends, but we're all drowning. And it's like, well, that's when you need to go to your parish and be like, okay, this is my parish family, you know, and like for parishes to be able to connect people in that way, I think is really, really important.
I'm definitely part of this. Part of this research is really to try to help now that I have this information, right? Is to try to help churches see, like, actually you're holding the keys to the, you know, maybe one of the biggest policy problems for policymakers. So the churches can do so much. And I know, like, you know, one problem is, you know, you get near DC and everybody kind of gets like, you know, it's like a little bit of drunk. They get a little drunk. It's like, there's all this money flowing in, and like, could we just like, you know, get a part of that money? You know, it's like, okay, guys, like, if I could just get that through to the religious leaders of all the faiths, like, you are holding the keys to this. You don't have to try to be a little government. You have to try to be what you're meant to be, like what you're called to be. And I think that's actually really encouraging. So in the face of what looks like a really alarming problem for countries, this is one of the things I love about this research in this book, is that actually there's a lot of good news here. And the good news is that people are converted every day. Like, every day they meet communities they didn't know it was possible. They go, oh, like, they don't look crazy. They've got another kid than I have, and we could do this too. So conversion is possible. Changing what you want is possible. It happens every day. And actually, like, this is the way Christianity grows and spreads. And it's how God means for the world to become a more fertile place, right? Amen. So so like, I'm very optimistic. And even just in the years since the book has been out, the number of letters and messages I get on private channels and my email, you know, we're having a fifth because of this. We're having a second because we met your book. And it's so simple. You're like, wow. So just reading what was in the heart of moms like you causes younger women to say, oh, like, I could have one more than I was thinking. And then I think, okay, like this isn't that hard for God, right? It's not that hard for God.
Very true.
Right.
Yeah.
So as we got to wrap up our conversation, I really want to give you an opportunity to speak to those women, like the women who are like sending you those letters and all of that. What do you want women to know? What do you want that young mom, like, what do you want them to know? What would you say to them no matter where they're at right
well,
now?
first of all, just to honor and just affirm what people are doing. Cause when they're young, and I remember this, like, it seemed like I would never be past the early years. Like I would never, now I tell my younger mom friends, like my high school boys fight over who's going to make me a latte in the morning, and this was like what seemed to me like a never ending stretch of just like bodily and mental exhaustion. So first of all, like it won't last forever. It does get easier.
Yes.
And that's the first thing. The second thing is that you are doing, in a sense, something so valuable that like countries can't buy it. And that's really impressive. It's really amazing. So you are possessing an energy and a grace that is sacred and special. That's the marital energy, right? We say, and it should be just protected and affirmed. So to thank people for kind of stepping out in faith, I would want to say that. And the third thing, which I think applies to all of us at all stages of our lives, is not to, I'm just going to sound funny. Our culture is really obsessed with being done. And you're going to hear that a lot as a young mom. Are you done yet? Are you done now? And even though you're not, may not be tempted to be done in the way that our culture is done, I just want to encourage people to actually really embrace that not being done. So even if you're not ready today, and you may not feel ready for a couple of years, like you can take a break, just don't close the door, because I heard so many stories, and I've seen this in my own life, of like, God will give you the grace when you need to have it. So, this is a really powerful witness to other people who might say, oh, you just had such a terrible delivery. Like, are you done now? You can just say, like, we never say never, but we're not ready today. And to try to find ways of explaining what it would mean to not be done, that there's a kind of long-term collaboration with God. That I think is really important, because sometimes you need to protect your space. But the culture is obsessed with doneness. And there's a huge witness in that. There's a huge witness. I've met so many women who say, you mean you don't have to be done? You don't have to decide you're done? Yeah, don't do anything permanent. Don't do anything permanent. Space your children in the way that you can. But watch and wait. God will work on your heart. God will give you perhaps what you're lacking. And there's a real witness in just simply saying to people, we're never going to be done totally, but we are waiting for God to provide the resources. So those are a few things there that I would say.
Catherine, thank you so much for this.
Welcome.
Where can people get the book or stay connected with you?
Yeah, I have a terrible website, so I won't give you that. I'm like behind the times on. But my book is on Amazon, and there's a wonderful Audible version, which I did not record myself, but she does a wonderful job reading and with the different voices of the stories. So the Audible, Amazon for the hard copy, and there's a Kindle, of course. I'm on X. It's probably the place I'm most active in terms of talking about my research. So those are some options. And to pray for me, because I'm going to go back into the field and interview dads like you, Mike. So that's the next project.
Oh, that sounds like, I'm very excited to hear about that. We'll have to have you back on when that comes out.
100%. We will have you back on.
Thank you for this work. It is bringing hope and encouragement, and it's the power of story. So God bless you. Thank you for doing that. Thanks for joining us today.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
So we really hope that you enjoyed that. And I'm just going to give you a few key takeaways. There were so many, and there's more listed below in our show notes, but I just want to highlight a few things. First of all, that the conviction that is formed by faith that children are good for marriage is not irrational. Secular people believe that having many children is irrational, and it is not, because it is something that is born of conviction. I thought this was an excellent point. She said many people use their own dysfunction and struggles as an excuse to not have more children, but the reality is that those struggles and dysfunctions are going to be there no matter how many children you have.
Right. So deal with that, but also.
Exactly. Definitely deal with those things, but don't use children as an excuse for the things that make your life a little bit more difficult. Children are a blessing. Another key takeaway, mothers achieve their full potential through their children. That is something that I have always firmly believed in.
And that's true for dads too. And I haven't done the research yet, but I know it's true.
Right, exactly. Let's see. Most mothers of large families don't care what people say because you know what? Our joy doesn't come from what people say. Our joy comes from the choices that we've made in our life and from our children.
All right, and there are more takeaways that you can look for in the show notes, but I want to give you a couple questions, unless you wanted to add one more.
Just this fact that mothers, and I think she said this at the end of the interview, the mother should never focus on being done.
Yeah, I was going to.
Yeah, and that instead embrace your fertility, and God will give you the grace when you need it. Your family is a long-term collaboration with the Lord. And I thought that was a really great point.
Yeah, which leads to just a question. Again, thinking about this whole idea of being open to God's plan, do we as a couple talk about being done, or are we, do we talk about getting started,
Yeah.
Do we see it? What's our view? What's our worldview of children, and how are they received in our home? And then, do we see children as that blessing, and do we want more blessings in our lives right now? So again, use this conversation, use this kind of insight, if you will, and also make it practically real in your home. Think about how this influences your marriage, your family, and the way that the two of you, regardless of where you're at in your marriage, in your kind of fertility journey, for lack of a better term, let's talk about this and see how it has affected us, and what are the fruits that you might glean from it. What really resonated, what really struck you, and bring that to a conversation with your spouse. All right. And if you want to get the book, that'll be linked here in the show notes.
Buy it on Amazon.
And we can go from there. Yep. All right. Well, and until next time, may the Lord bless you and keep you.